Number 10. Byron David Smith. He was supposed to be invisible that day. His truck was parked blocks away, his lights were off, his home looked empty. But Byron David Smith wasn't away for the holiday. He was waiting. Smith, a 64-year-old retired security engineer for the U.S. State Department, had spent his career protecting American embassies from terrorist threats around the world. He was methodical, patient, and precise. When his Little Falls home became the repeated target of burglaries in 2012, something in him shifted. He installed an extensive surveillance system. He moved his vehicle from the property to create the appearance of an empty house. And on November 22, 2012, Thanksgiving morning, he descended into his basement, sat in a chair, and waited, with a rifle across his lap. 17-year-old Nicholas Brady broke in first, descending the basement steps. Smith shot him. Brady tumbled down the steps. Smith shot him again. 18-year-old Hale Kiffer came next, calling out her cousin's name as she descended. Smith opened fire a second time, shooting Kiffer multiple times. Audio from Smith's own home security system, which he had recording the entire time, captured what happened after the shooting stopped. Smith was heard mocking the dying teenagers. He was heard describing what he had done in calm, deliberate language. He referred to them as vermin. Investigators who arrived the following day were stunned. The teens had been shot a combined 9 times. Smith surrendered peacefully and claimed self-defense under Minnesota's Castle Doctrine law. He told authorities he had feared for his life after a series of break-ins and believed deadly force was justified. The jury disagreed. Evidence showed that both victims had been shot even after they no longer posed any threat. Prosecutors argued Smith had not merely defended himself, he had lured, ambushed, and executed 2 unarmed teenagers. In April 2014, Smith was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. The Minnesota Supreme Court upheld the conviction in 2016. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his appeal in 2021. The community of Little Falls remained divided for years. Some saw Smith as a vigilante pushed past his limit. Others saw a man who would plan 2 killings with the same precision he once used to guard foreign embassies. What the audio recording captured, Smith calmly narrating the deaths of 2 teenagers as they happened, was something no one in that courtroom could unhear.
Number 9. Mohammed Noor. She had called 911 to help someone. 22 minutes later, she was dead, shot through the door of a police cruiser by the officer who had come to respond. Mohammed Noor joined the Minneapolis Police Department in 2015, becoming one of the first Somali-American officers in the city's history. His hiring had been celebrated as a milestone in community policing. By the summer of 2017, he had been on the force for less than 2 years. On the night of July 15, 2017, Justine Rusjik Danand, a 40-year-old Australian-American yoga instructor and life coach engaged to be married, called 911 to report what she believed was a sexual assault occurring behind her Minneapolis home. Officers Noor and his partner Harity responded. Their squad car moved slowly through the alley. Then, according to Harity's testimony, a loud bang struck the side of the vehicle. Harity reported being startled. Noor, seated in the passenger seat, drew his weapon and fired a single shot across his own partner's body and through the open driver's side window, striking Damond, who was standing beside the car, in the abdomen. She died at the scene. Neither officer had activated their body cameras before the shooting. There was no footage of the moment Damond was killed. The case triggered international outrage, particularly in Australia, where Damond's family and the government demanded answers. Minneapolis's police chief resigned within weeks.
The department changed its body camera activation policy as a direct result. Newer was charged with second-degree intentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. At trial in 2019, he testified that he had heard a sound and feared an ambush, that the shooting was a split-second act of self-preservation. The jury did not accept that defense on the murder counts. He was convicted of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. The legal story, however, wasn't over. In 2021, the Minnesota Supreme Court overturned the third-degree murder conviction, ruling that the statute required generalized indifference to human life, not a targeted act directed at a specific person. Newer was resentenced to 57 months for manslaughter alone. He was released on supervised parole in 2022, having served roughly 3 years. To this day, Damon's fiancée, Dawn Damon, publicly forgave Newer at sentencing, a statement of grace that was as widely reported as the verdict itself. The question that prosecutors, legal scholars, and Damon's family have never fully resolved: how does a trained officer responding to a reported assault fire a lethal shot across his own partner's body at a woman standing beside their car?
Number 8. Kimberly Potter. For 26 years, she had been a police officer. She had trained recruits, served as union president, and built a career in a suburb of Minneapolis. On April 11, 2021, a single moment in a parking lot unraveled all of it. Kimberly Potter and a trainee officer she was supervising pulled over 20-year-old Dante Wright in Brooklyn Center for expired license plate tags and an air freshener hanging from his mirror. When officers ran Wright's name, they found an outstanding warrant. They moved to arrest him. Wright resisted and got back into his vehicle. Potter, according to her own testimony, reached for her taser to stop him from driving away, but drew her firearm instead. She announced, "Taser, taser, taser," then fired a single shot. Wright drove away, crashed a short distance ahead, and died. It happened just miles from the Hennepin County Courthouse, where Derek Chauvin was on trial for the murder of George Floyd. The timing made the Brooklyn Center shooting an immediate flashpoint. Protests erupted. The Brooklyn Center police chief and city manager both resigned. Potter turned herself in and resigned the same day. At her December 2021 trial, she wept on the stand. She testified that she had panicked, that she had not intended to draw her firearm, that she was devastated. Body camera footage shown to the jury captured her voice immediately after the shooting. "I grabbed the wrong fucking gun," and showed her collapsing in distress. Prosecutors argued that regardless of intent, a 26-year veteran of law enforcement bore responsibility for a fatal mistake that cost a young man his life. The jury convicted her of both first- and second-degree manslaughter in December 2021. Judge Regina Chu issued a sentence of 24 months, far below the state's recommended sentencing guidelines of roughly 7 years, citing mitigating factors, including that the shooting was intentional. Potter served 16 months and was released in April 2023. Wright's family called the sentence a slap in the wrist. The case became one of Minnesota's most publicly debated criminal proceedings, a collision point between questions of police accountability, intent, training failure, and the weight that consequences should carry when the act was accidental, but the outcome was permanent. Dante Wright was 20 years old. He had a young son. The parking lot where he died is less than 12 miles from where George Floyd took his last breath.
Number 7. Lois Reese. She looked like anyone's grandmother. White hair, soft features, a daycare worker with 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. She played video poker obsessively at local casinos, and in the spring of 2018, she committed 2 murders across 2 states without drawing a single second glance. Lois Reese and her husband David had been married for decades in the small southern Minnesota town of Blooming Prairie. Behind the ordinary exterior, investigators would later uncover a gambling addiction that had quietly hollowed out the couple's finances. In March 2018, during an argument at their home, Lois shot David in the heart. She then forged his checks, stole approximately $11,000 from his bank account, and walked out. David's body was not discovered for nearly 2 weeks. By then, Lois Reese was already far away, driving south, passing through casinos along the way, winning a jackpot in Louisiana. She landed in Fort Myers Beach, Florida, where she befriended 59-year-old Pamela Hutchinson, a woman who bore a striking physical resemblance to her. Similar age, similar height, nearly identical white hair. In April 2018, Hutchinson was found shot to death in her timeshare unit. Reese had stolen her credit cards, withdrawn cash from her accounts, taken her car, and assumed elements of her identity. She was already headed to Texas. Investigators across 2 states coordinated rapidly. A restaurant employee in South Padre Island, Texas, recognized Reese from surveillance footage broadcast on television and alerted authorities. She was arrested on April 19, 2018, at a beachside restaurant by federal marshals, calm, without resistance. Florida prosecuted first. Reese pled guilty to first-degree murder in Hutchinson's killing and was sentenced to life in prison. She was then extradited to Minnesota, where she initially pled not guilty to David's murder, before changing her plea to guilty in August 2020. A second life sentence was imposed. The 2 will run consecutively. At her Minnesota sentencing, Reese addressed the court briefly. "My life without David is my sentence. My heart will always be his." Law enforcement officials noted that when she was arrested in Texas, she had already been befriending another woman in a pattern disturbingly similar to the one preceding Hutchinson's murder. Authorities believe, had she not been caught, there would have been a third victim. The killer grandma was never more dangerous than when she looked the most ordinary.
Number 6. Cody Foreign Cam.
They didn't know each other. There is no documented history between them, no shared grievance, no prior incident. On February 9, 2022, Deshaun Hill Jr., a 15-year-old honor roll student and starting quarterback for Minneapolis North High School, was walking toward a bus stop after school let out early. Cody Foreigncam was walking the opposite direction on the same sidewalk. Surveillance footage captured them passing close enough to brush shoulders. Then, Foreigncam reached into a backpack. 3 shots were fired. Deshaun Hill was struck in the head. He was pronounced dead at North Memorial Medical Center. He was 15 years old. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from the surrounding blocks. Earlier that same day, Foreigncam had been knocked to the ground and robbed of his cell phone at knife point near a convenience store. Prosecutors theorized that he had armed himself and was searching for the person who had robbed him when he encountered Hill. Detectives traced clothing, witness accounts, and movements through the neighborhood. Foreigncam was identified and arrested. At trial in January 2023, the defense challenged the reliability of witness descriptions and pointed to the absence of the murder weapon. Prosecutors played a 19-minute recorded interrogation of Foreigncam. The jury deliberated for under an hour before returning a guilty verdict on 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to over 38 years in prison. The case then took a legal turn. The Minnesota Court of Appeals reversed the conviction in 2024, ruling that investigators had illegally detained Foreigncam before questioning him, holding him beyond his scheduled release on a separate Carleton County matter to allow Minneapolis detectives time to arrive and conduct the interrogation. Because his statements were ruled unlawfully obtained, a retrial was ordered. Rather than face a second trial, Foreigncam pled guilty in February 2026 to second-degree intentional murder. He was sentenced to 28 years. As part of the plea deal, he waived the right to any further appeal. Deshaun Hill's mother told the court her son was taken by a man who thought no one would care about Madeline. She meant Deshaun. The slip said everything about the weight she had been carrying for 4 years. The school, where Deshaun Hill played quarterback, walked him across a graduation stage he never lived to see. An empty gesture that somehow made the loss more real.
Number 5. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. She was 22 years old, talking on her phone in a mall parking lot. She never made it to her car. On November 22, 2003, Drew Shoden, a University of North Dakota senior and cheerleader, originally from Pequot Lakes, Minnesota, was abducted from the Columbia Mall in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Within hours, her phone was found at the scene. The call she had been on with her boyfriend captured the terrifying moment of her disappearance. Voices, struggle, then silence. The investigation moved fast. A registered sex offender named Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. had been working in the area. Rodriguez was a Level 3 sex offender, the highest designation under Minnesota's classification system, indicating the greatest assessed risk of reoffending, who had been released from Minnesota State Prison in May 2003 after serving time for a 1999 sexual assault in Crookston, Minnesota. Within 6 months of his release, Drew Shoden was gone. Rodriguez was identified through witness accounts and evidence connecting him to the area. He was arrested at his sister's home in Crookston, Minnesota in December 2003. Investigators found Shoden's blood in his vehicle. Her body was discovered in April 2004 in a ravine near Crookston, roughly 4 months after her disappearance, just across the state border. She had been bound, sexually assaulted, and stabbed. Because the kidnapping crossed state lines, the federal government assumed jurisdiction. Rodriguez was tried in federal court in Fargo, North Dakota. In 2006, he was convicted of kidnapping resulting in death and sentenced to death by lethal injection. On November 19, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was executed at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, the first federal execution directly connected to a Minnesota-based sex offender in the modern era. He was 50 years old. Shoden's case sparked immediate and lasting legislative change. Congress passed Drew's Law in 2006, creating the National Sex Offender Public Website, a national online registry that allows the public to search offender records across all 50 states. Every registered sex offender listed on that federal database exists because Drew Shoden did not come home. The question that haunts Minnesota's sex offender management system. Rodriguez was assessed as a maximum risk Level 3 offender. He was released on schedule. 6 months later, a young woman was dead. Number 4. Cedric Lamont Berry. She was shown a house that didn't exist by people she had never met, for a reason she never suspected. On December 31, 2019, New Year's Eve, 28-year-old Monique Baugh, a Minneapolis real estate agent and mother of 2 young children, received what appeared to be a legitimate showing request. She drove to a home in Maple Grove, Minnesota, a suburb northwest of Minneapolis. What she walked into was a trap. Authorities allege the plot originated with Lyndon Wiggins, a drug dealer and aspiring music promoter who had a dispute with Baugh's boyfriend, John Mitchell Momo, over a professional falling out and accusations of theft. Wiggins orchestrated the operation. A former Hennepin County probation officer named Elsa Segura, who had a romantic link to Wiggins, used her phone to lure Baugh to the fake showing. When Baugh arrived, Cedric Lamont Berry and his co-defendant, Barry Davis, were waiting. They abducted her at gunpoint, forced her into the back of a rented U-Haul truck, and drove her through Minneapolis. While she was held captive, a masked gunman entered the home of her boyfriend's family and shot him 4 times. He survived. Monique Baugh did not. She was shot and killed in an alley on the north side of Minneapolis. Her body was found that evening. The investigation was meticulous.
prosecutors built their case on surveillance footage, cell site location data, DNA evidence recovered from the U-Haul, and the financial trail connecting the defendants. The complexity of the conspiracy, spanning multiple suspects, 2 simultaneous crime scenes, and a web of personal relationships, required months to untangle. Cedric Berry and Barry Davis were tried jointly in a Hennepin County courtroom. Berry denied involvement, claiming through his attorney that he had been selling drugs that day and rented the U-Haul for moving marijuana, not for any conspiracy. The jury was unmoved. In June 2021, both men were convicted on all 4 counts, including aiding and abetting first-degree premeditated murder. In July 2021, Cedric Berry was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Baugh's mother, addressing the court before sentencing, said her daughter had been treated as less than human. The Minnesota Supreme Court affirmed Berry's conviction in 2026 after he challenged the admissibility of cell site location data. Monique Baugh's children were 3 years old and 1 year old when her mother was taken. They were present in the home when her boyfriend was shot. They are the case's invisible victims, witnesses to a violence they were far too young to understand.
Number 3. Adam Fravel. She dropped her kids off at daycare at 8 a.m. on March 31, 2023. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Madeline Kingsbury alive. Madeline Kingsbury was 26 years old, a mother of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old she shared with her ex-partner, Adam Fravel. The couple had separated, but were still sharing a home in Winona, Minnesota, while Kingsbury searched for her own place. That morning, Fravel had accompanied her on the daycare drop-off. After she left the car, investigators say, she never walked away alone. Fravel told investigators Kingsbury had gone out by herself around 10 a.m. and he hadn't heard from her since. Her disappearance triggered one of the largest volunteer search efforts in recent Minnesota memory, thousands of people combing fields, riverbanks, and roadsides across the region. National attention followed. Her family pressed publicly and relentlessly for answers. Suspicion quietly centered on Fravel from early in the investigation. In April 2023, he issued a statement through his attorney maintaining his innocence. On June 4, 2023, more than 2 months after Madeline disappeared, a Fillmore County deputy found her remains in a culvert on a dead-end road near Mabel, Minnesota, not far from property owned by Fravel's parents. She had been wrapped inside a gray fitted sheet sealed with duct tape. A medical examiner determined she had likely died from asphyxiation, consistent with strangulation. Fravel was arrested days later. His trial, moved to Blue Earth County due to pre-trial publicity, began in fall 2024. Prosecutors presented evidence of a documented pattern of domestic violence. The jury convicted him on all 4 counts, 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. The deliberation took less than a day. In December 2024, Adam Fravel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before sentencing, Madeline's father stood in open court and told her daughter's killer she was attacked by a coward who was twice her size. When he realized he couldn't control her anymore, he killed her. The Minnesota Supreme Court unanimously affirmed the conviction in April 2026. The Madeline Kingsbury Foundation, created in her memory, focuses on domestic violence awareness and advocacy. What it cannot answer, and what the case file does not fully resolve, is precisely how long Fravel had been planning what he did, and whether any point along that 2-month search was the moment he almost came forward. He hid her for 65 days, and for 65 days, he watched her family search.
Number 2. Brian George Fitch Sr. The night before he killed a police officer, Brian George Fitch Sr. told a friend exactly what he planned to do. Fitch had a long and documented criminal history: theft, assault, fleeing officers, terroristic threats. He had been released from prison in February 2014. A Minnesota Department of Corrections warrant had already been issued for a violation by June. He was a wanted fugitive when Officer Scott Patrick pulled his vehicle over on Dodd Road in West St. Paul on the afternoon of July 30, 2014. What happened in the next few seconds ended a 19-year law enforcement career. Patrick, 47, a married father of 2 teenage daughters and the most senior officer in the Mendota Heights Police Department, was shot and critically wounded at the scene. He was the first Mendota Heights officer ever killed in the line of duty. He died from his injuries. Fitch fled. An 8-hour manhunt followed, eventually cornering him in his vehicle in St. Paul. He opened fire on responding officers. 3 were shot at during the standoff. Fitch was wounded and taken into custody. Prosecutors presented 55 witnesses and 136 pieces of evidence. The defense called none. A friend of Fitch's testified to the statement he had made the previous night that he would shoot any officer who pulled him over because he refused to go back to prison. The recorded audio of the traffic stop and witness accounts corroborated the timeline. The jury deliberated for hours, then asked to see the firearm recovered from Fitch's possession. They returned a guilty verdict on all counts: first-degree premeditated murder of Officer Patrick and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the shootout with St. Paul officers. At sentencing, Fitch, hands bound, proclaimed his innocence. Judge Karen Asfog sentenced him to life in prison without parole, the mandatory sentence for his conviction, plus an additional 54 years for the attempted murders. As the sentence was read, Fitch erupted in the courtroom, yelling accusations at the judge. Applause broke out as he was removed. Officer Patrick's family, colleagues, and a courtroom packed with uniformed law enforcement officers sat through it all. His half-brother told the court afterward, "There are no routine traffic stops." The details that came out at trial remain difficult to sit with. Fitch was already a wanted man when Patrick pulled him over. The warrant had been active for weeks. He had announced the night before what he intended to do. Scott Patrick, by all accounts, had no way of knowing any of it. Number 1. Derek Chauvin. There was a camera. There were witnesses. There was a man on the ground telling officers he couldn't breathe. And for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, nothing stopped what was happening. On May 25, 2020, George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, was detained outside a Minneapolis convenience store after a store employee reported that he had used a counterfeit $20 bill. Officers arrived and found Floyd in his vehicle. What followed was captured on multiple sources: bystander phones, surveillance cameras, and police body cameras. Floyd was handcuffed and lowered to the pavement near the intersection of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue. Chauvin, a 19 Minneapolis Police Department veteran, kneeled on Floyd's neck. Floyd repeatedly said he could not breathe. He called out for his deceased mother. He lost consciousness. He died. Chauvin kept his knee in place for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, including 2 minutes and 53 seconds after Floyd had become unresponsive. What followed was seismic. Minneapolis erupted. Then cities across the country erupted. Then cities around the world. The footage of Floyd's death became one of the most widely viewed and galvanizing documents in modern American history, igniting the largest wave of civil rights protests the United States had seen since the 1960s. 4 officers were terminated. Chauvin was arrested within 4 days. His trial began March 8, 2021. For 3 weeks, the world watched. Medical experts testified that Floyd died from cardiopulmonary arrest caused by law enforcement's subdural neck compression, in other words, by Chauvin's knee. The department's own use of force instructor testified that what Chauvin had done violated Minneapolis PD training and policy. Prosecutors called Chauvin's conduct absolutely unnecessary. Chauvin's defense pointed to Floyd's underlying health conditions and fentanyl in his system.
The jury deliberated for just over 10 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 3 counts: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. On June 25, 2021, Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill sentenced Chauvin to 22.5 years in prison, above the state's recommended guidelines, citing 5 aggravating factors, including that the killing occurred in the presence of children and involved an abuse of a position of authority. In 2021, Chauvin also pleaded guilty to separate federal civil rights charges, accepting a concurrent federal sentence of 21 years. The Minnesota Court of Appeals upheld his state conviction in 2023. As of 2025, he has sought a new trial, which remains pending. The intersection where George Floyd died is now a memorial. The city has debated, litigated, and argued over what to do with that block ever since. Street art, flowers, and handwritten notes have marked it continuously for years. What Derek Chauvin's case exposed was not a secret. Officers, legal scholars, community members, and activists had been raising the same concerns about use of force practices and accountability for decades. What changed on May 25, 2020, was that the whole world finally had to watch. George Floyd said, "I can't breathe," 27 times. It was documented. It is in the record. Every word is part of the official court transcript of the most consequential criminal trial in Minnesota history.